The Wonderful 101 is part of a last handful of Wii U exclusives to get a remaster or port of some kind, this month landing on Switch, PS4 and PC thanks to a successful Kickstarter campaign. And this is a special game. Released in 2013, it offered one of the most inventive uses of the Wii U's gamepad. So often I reviewed Wii U games back in the day to find that second screen was relegated to being a mirror image of the main screen, or in failing that, just a map. There aren't many developers who tried as valiantly as Platinum Games to use it properly, to tailor it to the experience. For The Wonderful 101 then, it paid off handsomely with a unique isometric brawler that demanded you use the touchscreen and switch your viewpoint. For the remaster, the Switch and PS4 conversions have a lot to live up to then. Do those controls translate well? And do they improve on the often sub 60 FPS performance of the original release? Let's find out. So what's the setup? Well, tasked with saving the Earth from an alien invasion, you take charge of heroes from the Wonderful 101, initially Wonder Red and Blue. You draw shapes on the screen via touch or the right analog stick to change abilities. For example, a straight line becomes a sword and a circle becomes a gauntlet, but as the ranks swell with more characters, more gestures open up. The goal? To build up your wonderful squad into a huge cluster of heroes, filling its ranks by lassoing passers-by. And then, taking down the increasingly large enemies, where the more people you have in your group, the more powerful your attacks become. There's an eye-catching comic book style to the action, taking cues from the cult classic Beautiful Joe, and visually at least, it translates wonderfully to Switch and PS4. Let's talk resolutions first. Originally, Wii U was somewhat limited in pushing a native 720p image. The camera would often draw back, making it hard to pick out the individual heroes, something that's vastly improved on Switch. Here you get a native 1920x1080 while docked, a 2.25 times increase in pixel output by comparison. Here's a side by side to show exactly that, where the list of visual features and effects are maintained exactly as is on Switch. Texture quality is a match, and you get the same depth of field effect, and even environmental shadows as the train weaves its course through the city. Switch gets everything then, and it's very possible that texture filtering is bumped in accordance with the resolution too. Though from this isometric angle, it's rarely put into clear enough perspective. The biggest upgrade visually then is that bump to 1080p. In terms of visual acuity, it holds up really well on Switch. Just like Wii U, there's virtually no anti-aliasing present here, leaving those geometric lines with a sawtooth effect. Simply by virtue of pushing more pixels though, it is less noticeable. This actually goes for portable play on Switch too. Taken off the dock, the resolution drops to 1280x720, but again with no anti-aliasing, it's a very similar presentation to Nintendo's last gen machine. Still, all round, nothing's lost. It's the version the Kickstarter put in focus first, and roughly the leap we would have expected. Jumping over to base PS4 meanwhile, we have a very similar setup again. You're getting a native 1920x1080 image here. The one extra you get to moving to that machine is a pass of anti-aliasing, plus frame rate improvements as I'll cover later. PS4 Pro is next. Support for Sony's enhanced machine is sadly fairly limited in scope here. You're getting a straight native 1080p picture much like the base machine, with the same visual settings in every other regard. But the fact is 4K TV users will be looking at an upscale from a quarter of the possible resolution. Given the age of the game at this point, I was kind of hoping to at least see 1440p on Pro as one of the more typical targets for the console. Now there is an upside to having parity with base PS4 visuals in frame rate, in that it's the smoothest console version overall. It holds 60fps far more consistently than the rest, but having a higher res 30fps mode might have been a nice alternative mode here, at least for those more invested in visual quality. Last but not least, of course, is the PC version. What we've got here in terms of extras is pretty straightforward, but the game as a whole is pretty functional. And yes, the resolution can genuinely go up to 4K here, unlike PS4 Pro, and even ultra-wide screens are supported. I will say in advance, make sure a gamepad's plugged in first, otherwise it defaults to PC keyboard controls, which can confuse the menus in my experience. Once you've got that, the graphics menu throws you 3 options: low, medium and high. There's a toggle for VSync, HDR, and well, that's pretty much it. The high quality preset is the one to pick, obviously, the reason being it's a feature match for what Wii U, Switch and PS4 push out settings wise. For example, comparing the low to high setting shows the game stripping out the depth of field effect and environmental shadows, leaving it looking a bit bare on low. It's the one to use if you're really battling to hold 60 FPS, but overall you will be settling for worse than Wii U's visual settings. It's also worth noting anti-aliasing is always engaged on PC regardless of setting, so that's kind of a baked-in advantage over Switch. For overall visual quality and clarity, PC is the one. On the topic of controls, the remaster on PS4, Switch and PC all have their own advantages. Sadly, there's no replacing a proper second touchscreen interface, but they each do what they can. On Switch you have a capacitive touchscreen well played portable, which you can use to draw shapes with your fingertip to swap hero abilities. Docked users will have to use the right analog stick meanwhile, which does take a little practice to get right, but works pretty well. Meanwhile, PS4 has the option of a trackpad at the centre of the DualShock 4, which you can use to make similar gestures. It's rare to see this used in any way this generation, and it makes sense on paper for the wonderful 101, but in practice I found it too sensitive to get working properly. Ultimately, I ended up using the right analog stick for all 3 versions, but we're getting options here, which is only a good thing. The bigger issue is how the Wii U second screen is repurposed on one display. Originally, the gamepad gave vital information via a kind of radar to show any straggling heroes in the area. It helped with the minuscule size of these characters, and it was almost essential to interpreting the chaos of the action. On Switch, PC and PS4 you have 2 options here. You can now either have a picture-in-picture, layering that radar view wherever you like over the gameplay, or if you like you can switch to a dual view mode, where the 2 screens are side by side with black space above and below. Again, there's some customization here letting you adjust how large each view is, but overall in practice, let's be honest here, having it overlaid in the corner makes more sense. For everything the wonderful 101 got right in using Wii U's gamepad, there's something to be said for its performance. 60 FPS is and remains the target on every console, but in 2013 this game just couldn't do it on Nintendo's last gen spec. 30 to 60 FPS was the general range, and so often through those first few missions it languished at 40 FPS for long stretches, with cutscenes dipping to that 30 FPS mark. This overhead view of the train is a real stress point. It's possible it could go even lower, but based on this sample, it really struggled to get to the target 60Hz refresh even in the best cases. And the fact is, the more heroes you add to your party, the lower that number would drop to, meaning the tail end of a level could dip to some low digits. Really, it would have made sense to cap the action at 30 FPS, but thankfully now we have more ways to play, and there's a chance to see 60 FPS in action. Next up is Switch while docked, and the surprise is that, well, performance isn't radically improved over Wii U. We have a typical range of again between 30 and 60 FPS, and again lots of gameplay between those 2 numbers. It's the frame rate no man's land, and with that panning camera it never feels all too consistent. One explanation for why this is the focus on boosting the resolution to 1080p. It's an extra stressor on the GPU side, and possibly one that could have been tapped into for a tighter lock at 60 FPS using the same 720p output as Wii U. Either way, it does make a case again for a 30 FPS cap on Switch. What's more worrying is this opening cutscene, where matching it with Wii U's playback actually shows it running worse on Nintendo's newer machine. That's 10 to 12 FPS lower at points. Thankfully the delta between the 2 isn't as huge in gameplay, and this cutscene is a bit of an outlier, but still, it's certainly not a step closer to hitting and holding 60 FPS on Switch. The turnout for Switch isn't quite what I'd expected. Even later battles drop to the 30 FPS line and under. The results in portable play meanwhile at least improve on docked play by a margin. The native output is a less demanding 720p of course, which helps boost the frame rate in action with lots of transparencies. So if we take that same sequence with the train again, portable play gets a lead by up to 5 FPS. For any viewpoint side on of Wonder Red, it's clear there's GPU headroom to push out more frames, despite capping the clock speed to a lower figure. Even so, it's telling that the game still hits a matching 23 FPS low point with docks during the top-down view of the city, which does suggest seeing so much geometry triggers a CPU bottleneck rather than a GPU one. Portable play is broadly in the same space performance-wise then, but expect moments to run marginally faster. For a much smoother ride, the PS4 systems and obviously PC are the best bet. Looking at base PS4, the general turnout is much closer to the mark. 60 FPS most of the way with some fluctuations down to 50 FPS in more hectic battles. Again, it's the build up of heroes in your party towards a level's end that really hammers the machine. But overall, it's very decently optimized around 1080p, plus you get that added AA. The worst case scenario is this battle. The background is bombarded by mortar fire and the ranks of your group have swelled. It's absolute chaos, and with the camera pulled far back to show it all in one frame. We go into the 40 FPS region here, but it's short-lived, and restores itself to 50 and 60 FPS eventually. It's not perfectly ideal, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not too glaring. For those looking to polish up those lingering drops into the 50s, PS4 Pro, shown here, really is the next step up. Yes, rendering at a similar 1080p to base is a bit of a disappointment, but the payoff is seeing the frame rate even out at almost an entirely 60 FPS lock. Outside of PC, this is the smoothest way to play, but again it does miss out on the crystal clear image possible at a true 4K. As a remaster package, it's notable we get a few extras included in the mix, like a new mission starring Luca in a side-scrolling style. Otherwise, a lot of what we see in the core game stays faithful to what made the original so great.
I've been waiting all my life for the chance to make those alien scum feel the sting of my Valiantium blade.
So where does that leave us? The wonderful 101 Remastered translates as well as it could have in terms of controls. The option for PS4's trackpad, Switch's touchscreen, and the customizable dual screen views give users all the options they could want. Meanwhile, the reworking on a visual level is limited to resolution boosts to 1080p, but that comic aesthetic holds up well with the higher pixel count. Whether it's Switch or PS4, the sheer scale of the action, with the camera drawn far out from a huge cluster of heroes, is what catches the eye, rather than just the micro detail. The only thing left on the wish list is some love for Xbox One, which is missing its own version. The biggest success for the wonderful 101 Remaster is that it's no longer locked to Wii U, giving it a better chance to get the attention it deserved. But that's all I have time for today. If you did find this technical breakdown useful in any way, feel free to like or subscribe, and don't forget to hit that bell to get notifications as any new video lands. To get a high quality version of this video, check out our Patreon at digitalfoundry.net, and to get in touch with me or the team, just use Twitter. But from me for now, thanks for watching.